She walked into that maximum security prison every morning, believing she could change lives. But what Margaret Thompson didn't know was that behind those steel bars lived someone who would change hers forever. A master manipulator with a secret so deadly, it would cost her everything. 3 weeks after discovering she had contracted HIV, Margaret was found dead in her apartment. But here's what will chill you to the bone. The inmate who infected her had known about his diagnosis for over 2 years. This isn't just another prison romance gone wrong. This is the story of how a decorated correctional officer became prey to the very predator she was sworn to contain. And tonight you'll discover whether Margaret Thompson died by accident, by her own hand, or if someone made sure she would never tell the truth about what happened behind those prison walls. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The questions that haunted investigators for months still remain unanswered today. How did an inmate serving life without parole gain such complete control over the woman who was supposed to be controlling him? Was this calculated revenge against the system that caged him, or something far more personal and twisted? And most disturbing of all, when Margaret discovered the truth about what he had done to her, did she choose to end her own life, or did someone choose to end it for her? What you're about to hear will force you to question everything you think you know about power, manipulation, and justice. Because in this case, the person with the most to lose wasn't the one behind bars. Margaret Thompson wasn't supposed to become a prison warden. At 28, she had planned to be a social worker, helping troubled kids find their way. But after her younger brother Marcus was killed in a gang shooting, everything changed. She traded her social work degree for a career in corrections, determined to prove that even the most hardened criminals could be rehabilitated. Her colleagues at Riverside Correctional Facility respected her immediately. She was the kind of warden who remembered inmates' names, who actually read their case files, who believed that treating people with dignity could spark real change. Margaret had been promoted faster than anyone in the facility's history, and she carried that success with quiet pride. She lived alone in a small apartment 20 minutes from the prison, spent her weekends volunteering at a local youth center, and called her mother every Sunday without fail. Her life was structured, purposeful, and completely under her control, or so she thought. On the other side of those steel bars lived someone who understood control in ways Margaret never could. Travis Bennett had been manipulating people since he was 12 years old. Now 31, he had spent the last 8 years at Riverside serving life without parole for the murder of his girlfriend and her new boyfriend. But Travis wasn't your typical lifer. He was educated, articulate, and possessed a charm that had gotten him everything from extra commissary privileges to love letters from women who had never met him. The other inmates both feared and respected him. The guards found him unusually cooperative, and Travis used every single one of these relationships to his advantage. What nobody knew was that 2 years earlier, during a brief stint in the prison infirmary, Travis had received devastating news. He was HIV positive, likely contracted during an encounter with another inmate. But instead of seeing this as a death sentence, Travis saw it as the ultimate weapon. He began to plan something that would give him power over the very people who held power over him. It started with a simple request during Margaret's routine security rounds. Travis asked if he could recommend a book to the prison library. Nothing inappropriate, nothing that raised red flags, just an intelligent conversation about literature between a warden and an inmate who seemed genuinely interested in self-improvement. Margaret found herself looking forward to these brief exchanges. Travis never asked for favors, never pushed boundaries, never made her uncomfortable. He simply talked to her like a human being in a place where humanity was often forgotten. Over several months, their conversations grew longer and more personal. Travis shared stories about his childhood, expressed genuine remorse for his crimes, and seemed authentically interested in Margaret's work with at-risk youth. He had a way of making her feel heard, understood, and appreciated in ways that nobody in her personal life ever had. The first time Margaret agreed to meet Travis alone in her office was to discuss his participation in a new rehabilitation program she was developing. She told herself it was purely professional, that she was simply doing her job. But as Travis sat across from her desk, speaking passionately about second chances and redemption, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years, a genuine connection with another person. Travis was careful, patient, strategic. He never pushed too hard or moved too fast. When he finally reached across her desk and touched her hand during one of their late evening meetings, Margaret didn't pull away. She should have. Every rule, every regulation, every oath she had taken demanded that she pull away. Instead, she looked into his eyes and saw someone who seemed to truly see her. That night, for the first time in her career, Margaret Thompson crossed a line she never imagined she would cross. Their affair began with stolen moments in her office after the night shift had begun. Travis would request to see the warden about various administrative matters, and Margaret would ensure they were alone. What started as conversations and gentle touches escalated quickly into something much more intimate. Margaret knew the risks, to her career, to her reputation, to her safety. But Travis made her feel alive in ways she had forgotten were possible. He was attentive, passionate, and seemingly devoted to her in ways that the few men she had dated never were. Travis told her things he claimed he had never told anyone else. He spoke about wanting to be a better man, about how she had given him hope for a future beyond these walls, about how she was the first person to make him believe he was worth saving. Margaret began to believe that what they had was special, even transformative. She convinced herself that she was helping him heal while he helped her feel whole again. What Margaret didn't know was that every word, every touch, every moment of intimacy was part of Travis's carefully calculated plan. He had studied her for months before making his first move, learning about her background, her motivations, her vulnerabilities. He knew about her brother's death, her dedication to rehabilitation, her loneliness. Most importantly, he knew exactly how to present himself as everything she needed to feel validated and valued. Travis had practiced this manipulation with other women, both in prison and during his life on the outside. He understood that the most effective predators didn't use force. They used psychological warfare to make their victims complicit in their own destruction. Every conversation they had was designed to deepen Margaret's emotional investment in their relationship while simultaneously isolating her from her support systems and professional judgment. 3 months into their affair, Margaret began experiencing symptoms that worried her. She felt constantly exhausted, had recurring headaches, and developed a persistent rash that wouldn't respond to over-the-counter treatments. When she finally visited her doctor, the routine blood work revealed what would change everything. Margaret Thompson was HIV positive. The doctor asked about her sexual history, whether she had used protection with recent partners, and whether she had any reason to believe she might have been exposed to the virus. Margaret sat in that sterile examination room, feeling her entire world collapse as she realized there was only one possible source of her infection. Travis had never mentioned being HIV positive. He had never suggested they use protection. He had never given her any reason to believe she was at risk. That night, Margaret confronted Travis during one of their secret meetings. What she saw in his eyes when she told him about her diagnosis was something she had never seen before. Not surprise, not concern, not fear. What she saw was satisfaction. Travis didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he smiled, that charming smile that had first drawn her to him, and calmly explained that yes, he had known about his HIV status for over 2 years. He had been waiting for the right opportunity to use it. Margaret demanded to know why. Why would he do this to her? Why would he destroy her life? Travis's answer was simple and terrifying. Because he could. Because she had given him the power to do it. Because in a world where he had no control over anything, she had handed him complete control over her. And now, no matter what happened next, she would never be free of him. Margaret Thompson was found dead in her apartment on a Tuesday morning when she failed to report for work. Her neighbor had noticed that her car hadn't moved for 2 days and contacted the building manager, who discovered her body. The initial investigation suggested suicide. There was a note, no signs of forced entry, and Margaret had recently been prescribed antidepressants following her HIV diagnosis. But Detective Sarah Williams, who was assigned to the case, found several details that didn't align with a straightforward suicide. The note was typed, not handwritten. Margaret's apartment had been cleaned thoroughly, almost obsessively, which seemed inconsistent with someone in the depths of despair. Most importantly, the timing bothered Detective Williams. Margaret had died just days after requesting to meet with the prison's internal affairs department about what she described as serious misconduct that could compromise facility security. The investigation into Margaret's death quickly expanded when Detective Williams learned about her relationship with Travis Bennett. Prison security footage revealed that Margaret had indeed been meeting with Travis alone, often late at night, for several months before her death. Her computer showed that she had been researching HIV transmission, legal options for victims of intentional infection, and something that chilled investigators to the bone. She had been gathering evidence about Travis's past relationships with other women, both inside and outside the prison system. Margaret hadn't just discovered that Travis had intentionally infected her. She had discovered that she wasn't his first victim. Detective Williams's team uncovered a pattern of manipulation and infection that stretched back years. Travis had maintained relationships with at least 4 other women while incarcerated, including 2 prison employees and 2 women who had corresponded with him through a pen pal program. All of them had been infected with HIV. All of them had been told they were special, that Travis loved them, that their relationships were unique and transformative, and all of them had suffered devastating consequences when they learned the truth. One had lost her job and moved across the country. Another had attempted suicide. A third had died from AIDS-related complications, though her death had never been investigated as anything other than natural causes. Margaret Thompson had been gathering this evidence, documenting Travis's crimes, preparing to expose him and seek justice for his victims. The breakthrough in the case came when Detective Williams discovered that Travis Bennett had been making phone calls from prison that weren't being monitored. Using a contraband cell phone that Margaret herself had unknowingly helped him obtain, Travis had been in contact with his cousin Marcus, who lived just 15 miles from Margaret's apartment. Phone records revealed that Travis had called Marcus 3 times on the day Margaret died, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and once that evening. The final call lasted 18 minutes and ended just 2 hours before Margaret's estimated time of death. When police arrested Marcus Bennett, he initially denied any involvement in Margaret's death. But faced with evidence of the phone calls and his presence near Margaret's apartment that night, he broke down and revealed a truth that shocked everyone involved in the case. Travis hadn't just manipulated Margaret into falling in love with him and contracting HIV. He had convinced his cousin that Margaret was planning to falsely accuse him of rape, that she was going to destroy his life and reputation out of spite. Travis painted Margaret as a vindictive woman who couldn't handle being rejected, who was willing to ruin an innocent man rather than take responsibility for her own choices. Marcus, who had struggled with addiction and owed Travis money, agreed to talk some sense into her before she could destroy Travis's chances at appeal. But when Marcus confronted Margaret in her apartment that night, she showed him the evidence she had gathered about Travis's other victims. She explained that Travis was a predator who had intentionally infected multiple women, that she was planning to expose him not out of revenge, but to prevent him from hurting anyone else. Marcus realized he had been manipulated just as completely as Margaret had been. Travis had used him as a weapon, counting on his desperation and loyalty to eliminate the one person who could expose his crimes. But Marcus panicked. Instead of leaving, instead of walking away and letting Margaret pursue justice, he made a split-second decision that would haunt him forever. He forced Margaret to type a suicide note, staged the scene to look like she had taken her own life, and called Travis to report that the problem had been handled. Travis's response to learning about Margaret's death was chilling in its callousness. He thanked his cousin and told him that Margaret had brought this on herself by threatening his freedom. Even from behind bars, even facing life without parole, Travis Bennett had orchestrated the murder of a woman whose only crime was believing that everyone deserved a chance at redemption. The trial of Travis Bennett and his cousin Marcus became a media sensation that highlighted the dangers facing correctional officers and the sophisticated methods used by manipulative inmates to exploit the system. Travis was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, intentional transmission of HIV, and conspiracy to commit assault. Marcus faced charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy. The evidence against both men was overwhelming, but Travis's defense team argued that he had never explicitly ordered Marcus to kill Margaret, that her death was the result of his cousin's independent decision to silence her. They painted Travis as a victim of the system, a man whose only crime was falling in love with someone he couldn't have, whose HIV status was a medical condition rather than a weapon. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Jennifer Rodriguez, methodically destroyed Travis's defense by presenting evidence of his pattern of manipulation and intentional infection. They brought in testimony from Travis's other victims, women who had been convinced to risk everything for a man who saw them as nothing more than tools for his revenge against a society that had caged him. The most powerful testimony came from Dr. Linda Hayes, an infectious disease specialist, who explained how Travis had deliberately timed his encounters with Margaret to maximize the risk of transmission. He had refused treatment that could have reduced his viral load, had specifically chosen periods when he was most infectious, and had actively prevented Margaret from protecting herself by lying about his status and discouraging safe practices. During the trial, Marcus Bennett testified against his cousin, describing the years of psychological manipulation Travis had used to control him. He explained how Travis had convinced him that family loyalty demanded absolute obedience, how Travis had framed Margaret's investigation as a threat to the entire Bennett family, and how Travis had made him believe that silencing Margaret was an act of protection rather than murder. Marcus's testimony revealed the full extent of Travis's manipulation, showing how he had turned everyone around him into weapons in his war against the world that had rejected him. When Travis finally took the stand in his own defense, his mask finally slipped. Under aggressive cross-examination, his charm gave way to cold arrogance, his supposed remorse revealed as calculated performance, his claims of love exposed as predatory obsession. Travis Bennett was convicted on all charges and sentenced to death. Marcus Bennett received life without parole in exchange for his cooperation and testimony. But for those who loved Margaret Thompson, no verdict could truly deliver justice. Her mother, Patricia Thompson, spoke at the sentencing hearing about losing her daughter twice, first to the job that consumed her life, then to the predator who ended it. Margaret's colleagues at Riverside Correctional Facility struggled to understand how someone they respected and trusted could have been so completely deceived. The prison implemented new protocols for monitoring staff interactions with inmates, but many questioned whether any policy could truly protect against the kind of sophisticated psychological manipulation Travis had employed. The case raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of rehabilitation and the risks faced by those who work within the correctional system. Margaret Thompson had genuinely believed in the possibility of redemption, had seen her work as a calling to help even the most damaged individuals find their humanity. Travis Bennett had exploited that compassion, using her greatest strength, her ability to see good in others, as a weapon against her. The tragedy highlighted how predators could weaponize the very qualities that make their victims valuable to society, turning empathy and hope into vulnerabilities that could be fatal. Years later, Detective Sarah Williams still thinks about Margaret Thompson's case when she encounters other crimes involving manipulation and psychological abuse. She often wonders whether Margaret had any moment of recognition, any instant when she realized the full extent of Travis's deception and what it would cost her. The evidence suggests that Margaret died knowing she had been completely deceived by someone she had tried to help, someone she had genuinely cared about, someone who had seen her compassion as nothing more than an opportunity for revenge. In her final days, Margaret Thompson had transformed from victim to investigator, gathering evidence that would ultimately ensure Travis could never hurt anyone else the way he had hurt her and his other victims. The story of Margaret Thompson forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, power, and the predators who walk among us. How do we balance compassion with caution? How do we maintain our humanity while protecting ourselves from those who would exploit it? Margaret's tragedy reminds us that evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious warning signs. Sometimes it comes disguised as charm, as vulnerability, as someone who seems to need exactly what we have to offer. Travis Bennett understood that the most effective way to destroy someone isn't through violence or obvious threats. It's by convincing them to trust you completely, to open their hearts and defenses, to believe that you care about them when you're actually planning their destruction. What happened to Margaret Thompson could happen to any of us. We all have vulnerabilities, dreams, fears, and needs that skilled manipulators can identify and exploit. The difference between those who survive encounters with predators and those who don't often comes down to recognizing the warning signs before it's too late. Margaret's story teaches us that genuine love and connection don't require secrecy, don't demand that we compromise our values, and don't leave us isolated from our support systems. Real relationships build us up rather than breaking us down, create trust rather than exploiting it, and add to our lives rather than taking everything away. As we remember Margaret Thompson, we honor not just her memory, but her mission. She believed in the possibility of redemption, in the power of second chances, in the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. Those beliefs made her a target for someone who had no intention of changing, no interest in redemption, no capacity for genuine human connection. But those same beliefs also make our society worth protecting, our communities worth building, and our shared humanity worth defending. The question we must ask ourselves is not whether we should trust or help others, but how we can do so safely, wisely, and with the kind of discernment that might have saved Margaret's life. How would you feel if someone you trusted, someone you cared about, someone you were trying to help, had been planning your destruction from the very first moment you met? What would you want people to remember about your life, your dreams, your dedication to making the world a better place? And most importantly, what can we learn from Margaret's story to protect ourselves and others from predators who disguise themselves as people worth saving? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and remember that Margaret Thompson's legacy isn't the way she died, but the way she lived, believing in the possibility that even broken people can be made whole again.